Hi, everybody. Welcome to Christian Homestead. My name is Jared. I found something amazing. It's nothing short of astonishing, and I want to share it with you in this video. It has to do with this. We've been talking a lot about this transition between President Nelson and President Oaks. Here's a Salt Lake Tribune article 2 days after President Nelson became president of the church. The title is, "As Nelson's longtime right-hand man, Oaks brings a keen legal mind to Mormonism's new big three." And it's interesting because now that President Oaks is president of the church, he's done the same thing. He chose President D. Todd Christofferson to be one of his counselors, and he is also a keen legal mind. We've seen these interesting parallels between President Nelson and President Oaks. And during the course of my channel, I've mostly been focused on President Nelson because he was president of the church when I started my channel. And we have done deep dives into so many aspects of his presidency. And now that he's passed away, there's certain things that we need to go back and look at a little bit closer. So I have this spreadsheet called Prophets, President Nelson's Bridges. It used to be called President Nelson's Bookends because it didn't take long before we started noticing these events that would take place toward the beginning of his presidency, and then a similar event taking place toward the end. The only thing is that up until now, we didn't know if we were near the end of his presidency. For all we knew, he was going to survive to the millennium and be maybe the first one to be changed in the twinkling of an eye from mortality to immortality. But that didn't happen. But now we can know for sure that these different events that I took note of, they were toward the end of his presidency. Let me zoom in a little bit. So for example, we have these great American eclipses. The first one was the year before he became president of the church. And then the last one was the year before President Oaks became president of the church. We're going to come back and look at this much closer because the exciting thing that I found has to do with this, and I'm really excited about it. We actually recently talked about the Utah eclipse. We'll revisit that as well in this video. But let me just give you an idea of some of the other things. When he started, and in this what's it called? Like this press conference that they had, he said the phrase that he wanted to begin with the end in mind. And then he reminded us of that in the October 2023 General Conference, just a couple years before he passed away. I'm not going to explain all these. Some of these require explanation, but we have this thing that, according to Israel 365 News, is very rare. During his second year as president of the church, foxes were seen on the Temple Mount, which is very rare because foxes avoid populated areas. And then they were seen again July of 2023, 2 years before he passed away. And you can read the rest of this. There was more that was significant about these appearances. You can also search my channel for that to get the full story. We had this. The year before he became president of the church, there was a X 8.2 solar flare, September 10th, 2017. And then February 22nd, 2024, or the year before President Oaks' presidency, there was a 6.3 an X 6.3 solar flare, which was the largest since this one right here. So like there's this space of time where there wasn't a whole lot going on. There were some X-class solar flares. But we had the biggest one since 2017 in this year before President Oaks became president of the church. And then probably the last one I want to point out, during President Nelson's first year as president of the church, you had the Paradise, California fire, which made a lot of news. It destroyed that town. And then at the beginning of this year, the year that President Oaks became president of the church, we had the Los Angeles fires. So instead of being in a small town, It was in a major American city, and it essentially destroyed Pacific Palisades and other communities. It caused more damage, and it was more, in some ways, it was more dramatic. So you see where I'm getting at. So I wanted to look a little bit closer, or think a little bit more about the eclipses. I haven't put these eclipses out of my mind whatsoever. So let me show you something. Because I bring it up all the time, that I started a new channel called Explore Church Sites. Now that I live in Independence, Missouri, I wanted to start doing like video tours of these church sites, but I realized that I needed to make a completely new channel, just because there's so much to see. And on this channel, we mostly focus on church news, Second Coming, doctrine, and stuff like this. So this has to be its own channel. And as I've gone to all these sites, I have put together a map. And by the way, the map is in the description box of each video for both Christian Homestead and Explore Church Sites. And this is meant to help you go like track these down. There's not just the main church sites like Adamonte and Independence and Far West. There's a bunch of other ones. For example, I want to highlight this one. We got the release site, or the site of the release of Joseph and Hiram Smith and others when they were allowed to escape. And then from there, they went to Nauvoo. This is about halfway between Independence and Nauvoo, right here. The Far West Stake has put up a historical marker. On this side, it talks about the release. On the other side, it talks about Kirtland Camp. And it's in this small little town called Rothville, Missouri. Okay. So at this point, I have found pretty much all the sites. Like, there's probably some like, there's more like small ones to find, but I definitely have all the big ones, the medium ones, and then many of the small ones. I don't think I'm going to find too much more. But you can see that most of church history during the Missouri period took place here in this kind of like northwest quadrant of the modern Kansas City area and outward as you go north and east. Okay, so eclipses. So I just said that you had that first great American eclipse that took place the year before President Nelson became president of the church. And then the second great American eclipse took place the year before President Oaks became president of the church, or in other words, last year. So these total solar eclipses have a path of totality. So in order to get the full effect of the eclipse from Earth and to be in the shadow of the moon, you have to be in the path of totality. Okay, so I figured out how to get some of my old files from my old computer and upload it here so we can look at the path of totality. So let's go ahead and turn on the 27 Great American Solar Eclipse Path of Totality. This is what it looks like. I already knew that it went over Adamonte, which is up here. And look how close the upper boundary is to the entrance of Adamonte. I already knew that. And of course, I knew that Far West was included, and also the Temple Lot. Okay, here's Independence, Missouri. The Temple Lot is right here. So up until today, I already knew that. And I've always found this stunning. And definitely a sign specifically for our church. These are our sacred sites. If we hadn't been driven out of Missouri, these would be our main sites, these cities. Independence, or in other words, the city of Zion, New Jerusalem, Far West, Adamonte. And recently I learned that there was supposed to be a fourth one. Like, there were several different settlements, but there was supposed to be a fourth city similar to Adamonte in Far West and the city of Zion, called the city of Seth, that was also supposed to have a temple. And it's between Far West and Adamonte. Well, what I didn't know until doing this exercise today is that the path of totality includes all the sites that I have mapped, including the one that we were talking about, the release of Joseph and Hiram Smith. Look how close this gets to the upper boundary of the path of totality. It's almost as though a higher being planned this out. Now, full disclosure, I will say there is one minor site that's in southern Kansas City. This is essentially a property that was owned by Bishop Edward Partridge. And then I think later Alexander Donovan purchased it. This was probably during that period where Edward Partridge was buying land for the saints that were going to come to Zion. And he was supposed to purchase land for them to live on. So that's the one that's outside, that's in Missouri. All the rest of them are in the path of totality. All of them. And like I've said a million times before, the path of totality could not have varied by more than just a couple miles. Let's do some measurements here. Let's use the ruler tool. We'll go from the entrance of Adamondayaman to right here. This is just going to be approximate, of course. Let's do this. So there it is in meters. Let's do it. Here's kilometers, 2.42 kilometers approximately. And then miles, 1.5 miles. That's from the entrance of Adamondayaman to the path of totality. We could even move this over. I don't know. It's about the same. A little bit less than a mile and a half if you do it this way. Okay. So let's look at the site of the release of Joseph and Hiram Smith. Let's measure that. That one's a little bit further. It's more like 2.25 miles or so. But still, that's very, like, in relative terms, it's very, very close. This path of totality had to be pretty precise in order to include all these. Okay, so let's turn off the Missouri sites. And by the way, when you come here, I also have Kansas sites, I have Illinois, I have Iowa, but this is a work in progress. So it's not like I have every single church site, but I'm working toward that end. And as I go to them and get pictures and put them on the map, this will be updated. Okay, so this is the first great American eclipse. It goes from coast to coast, which by itself makes it kind of unusual. Elder Gary E. Stevenson of the Quorum of the 12 pointed this out in the October 2017 General Conference. He talked about the fact that that eclipse occurred on President Monson's 90th birthday. Not his 91st, not his 89th, just this nice round number of 90. I feel like that's significant. Later on, he points out that this happened on the same day, the total solar eclipse. And this was the first time such an eclipse had marched across the entire United States in 99 years. Very interesting. Okay, then October 14th of 2023, which was 7 days after the war in Israel started, and 7 days before the war in Israel started, was General Conference. And the day of this annular solar eclipse, this was exactly 2 years before President Oaks became president of the church on October 14th of this year. 2 years. Okay. This one, the year before President Nelson became president of the church. This one, 2 years before President Oaks became president of the church. And look at this. It goes through Utah. But not only that, I was able to get my all my temple place markers on here. Let's turn on all the temples. Don't worry about the colors. I need to get those updated. The path of annularity that went through Utah took the one path that it would need to take to miss as many temples as possible. All the temples were outside the path of totality, with the exception of two. The Manti, Utah temple, which was not in operation. It was under renovation when this happened. And then the only temple that was in operation was the Monticello, Utah temple. I find this very unlikely. You can see that Utah has lots of temples. Lots and lots and lots of temples. So for it to take this path and then to be exactly 2 years before President Oaks becomes president of the church, I'm sorry, that's just not likely. I don't think you have to be a mathematician to know that. Okay, so let's turn that off. Let's turn off the temples, but we'll leave that eclipse on here. And then the eclipse last year, the year before President Oaks became president of the church, it went the other direction. And it just so happens, let's turn on New York and Ohio. It just so happens that that path of totality went over the Peter Whitmer Sr. log home where the church was established. Right. Sorry. I just quickly threw this on here. This is Fayette, isn't it? Well, whatever. If it's not, we know that the church was established here. I have the pin on my other map, but we have that. We have the Sacred Grove, which is near the modern day Palmyra, New York temple. You have the Hill Cumorah right here. Okay. The most sacred sites in New York. And then not only that, but if we go down here to Ohio, the path of totality, the path of totality went over the Kirtland Temple. It also went over Hiram, Ohio, which was one of the church's headquarters for a short time. Here's Hiram, Ohio. So, something very, very precise, something very, very specific is going on here. And the thing that I realized today that I didn't really think about is this whole bookend thing. But the fact that the one eclipse happened the year before President Nelson became president of the church. The other one happened the year before President Oaks became president of the church. And then the one that went through Utah and missed all the temples, that happened 2 years before President Oaks became president of the church. It's very precise. Oh yeah, and then the first one happened on President Monson's 90th birthday. This is so astronomically unlikely that all these things would coincide in this way. So there was one potential insight in this talk by Elder Stevenson in the April 2024 General Conference, Bridging the Two Great Commandments. Before this talk, I was calling this spreadsheet President Nelson's bookends. So a bookend is where it's like you have, the bookends on either side of the books that hold the books together or hold them in place and hold them upright. So you have everything's between the bookends. But Elder Stevenson brought up this concept of suspension bridges. He likes bridges. And he said, bridges take us places we otherwise would not be able to go. In this case, if we can apply his words to this, these may not be bookends so much as they are bridges. And I think the bridge that we're on is we're going from the old world, the pre-millennial world, into the millennial world. This seems to be the transition. President Eyring recently said that these are the final preparations for the second coming. I think we're on the bridge. I think President Nelson was probably the first bookend tower of this bridge. I think that, look at this picture is perfect. I think these are the two bookend towers of the bridge that's taking us from this world into the millennial world. Think about everything that we've talked about in the similarities between President Nelson and Moses, President Oaks and Joshua. President Nelson is noted for his age. We've never had a president of the church in this dispensation that old. And Moses was noted for his age. Moses did not enter into the promised land. President Nelson has not made it to the millennium. And there's more, but it's just stunning. Later on, he says, it is a classic suspension bridge with bookend towers supported by massive piers. So I think a lot of people have put these eclipses out of their minds. I don't know what you think, if you still feel like they're significant, or if this was just like a minor event. But I think that putting all these three together, I think that this was collectively a major event, a huge sign. I think they indicate that we're on these bridges. And at this point, if we think of it that way, if we're looking at this bridge right here, President Nelson being this first one, for example, this would be like 2017. We come to President Nelson becoming president of the church. Here's his presidency right here. And then here's President Oaks. And maybe we're at this point right here and we're about to be off the bridge in a little bit. That's my best guess. Only time will tell. But this was the best thing that happened to me today. Just when I saw this right here, the release site of Joseph and Hiram Smith and how close that was to the upper limit of the path of totality, that just blew my mind. And then seeing all the other church sites, it's just crazy. It is so crazy. This is interesting too. The Battle of Crooked River marker. Let me click on this, if it'll let me do it. So the Far West Stake also put a historical marker here. But really, this whole area right here is where the Battle of Crooked River took place. So the center line goes through that. And it was at this battle that Elder, what was his name? I think it was David W. Panton. David W. Panton. Yeah. The part I wasn't sure about was the W. He is credited as being the first apostolic martyr in this dispensation because he died at this battle. But anyway, it's just kind of interesting that the center line goes right there. Oh, this is so crazy. But yeah, that's all that I have for this one. So I hope you enjoyed it. If you have any other observations, please send them my way. But I think we have a very, very exciting future ahead. I'll talk to you guys later.